What's good, my man? Society. It is your host with the most, Shadow Loke, back at you with another video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. That is how you help my channel get into the algorithm. Highly appreciate if you go ahead and do that. Don't cost a damn thing. Join the madness. Now, I had made a few videos prior to this one about the Mount Rushmore of Southern rappers and Northern rappers, right? And a few people had said, well, it wouldn't be, they wouldn't be able to be there without these guys, the innovators, the first, the creators, the ones that made it all happen, right? Without them, you wouldn't have, these successful individuals. So they should deserve a title up there. But see, the thing was the Mount Rushmore of the best of those rappers from those sides, meaning rappers, not producers, not innovators, not motivators, not creators. The best of the rappers from those sides. Keyword rapper, right? So now, if we're talking about the best or the first innovators in the music, obviously that's a complex subject that, quite frankly, I really don't think you can fit on a Mount Rushmore, right? And I really don't like playing the whole, well, the beginners or the creators deserve to be up there, because if we were to do that, well, then we would have to, do everything else, right? Like, well, you wouldn't be able to have the Kid Frost and the Little Robs and the Sir Dinos and all that without the brothers and their help and their connections in the rap industry, right? You know, you have to say them, and then we could say, well, rap wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for jazz, and jazz wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for blues, and blues wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't. So then we we go down this fucking chain of events of music, leading back to the Stone Age, right? Um, so that's why I just meant this type of music when it comes to Chicanos in general, right? Because obviously, without the brothers, you wouldn't be able to have rap. So we pay homage to them, right? But we're talking about this genre, meaning in Chicanos, rapping, you know, the first and innovators, like, you definitely would have to have Kid Frost on there. He was a major, player when it comes to the whole Chicano rap thing. Little Rob, because of his success and what he was able to do and elevate the music. Mr. Capone, because even though people be like, he's not Chicano, he's not blah, 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 blah. Bitch and cry all you want. He was born and raised in a southern neighborhood amongst raza. He grew up in a Mexican neighborhood. He was a part of a Mexican neighborhood. And he grew up being Chicano, whether you like it or not. And he did a lot for the Chicanos, whether you like it or not. Sure, some business, deals fell off. And sure, there's people that have came out and said this, and that, But at the end of the day, you cannot, speak about this, genre of music without, this individual. He was a big part of the Chicano scene when it comes to, high power, records, high power entertainment, and, everybody that was a part of high power. It wouldn't be able to be nothing without Mr. Capone. So, Mr. Capone is a big part of this, when it comes to how wide the music was able to travel with, people hearing the music when it comes to Chicano's rapping. Lighter shade of brown definitely would have to be up there as well. Brown side, being some of the first, individuals as well. Proper Dos, Conejo, and individuals like that. And then you would also have to talk about, individuals outside of what's California when it comes to hearing Mexicans rap, which would be like, SPM, unfortunately. He may be a pedophile and everything like that, but he was a good rapper and he was doing that, even though he's a piece of shit. But nonetheless, so he helped, do that. He was one of the first to be able to own his own Chicano rap label or whatever, right? Being in charge by a, Mexican, right? Because you only had very few. You had that one in Thump Records, right? Then you had like Familia Records, and then you had different parts of Southern California that had their own thing going on. You had Royalty and Low Profile. You had Mr. Night Owl, Mr. Shadow, Mr. Little One. And, San Diego is a big part of Chicano rap. Some of the best Chicano rappers come from San Diego. They were a big chunk and backbone of Chicano rap for a good while. You had rappers from the IE like LSD and Payaso and the Dukes Click. In Orange County, you had people like Little Blackie, Mr. Firm, Bundy, West Side Records, Still Jacking Beats. You had all of those, Los Malos Click and all of those individuals. And from the 805, you also had those individuals too, the Colonia Chicas area as well has been, big in the scene. And you had people from the SGV as well. So and then you had Southland, Mr. D in the 818. So you had a big portion of individuals that helped pioneer and push the Chicano music in their areas, because it was a collective of these individuals out there actually hustling at the trunk of their cars, out there hustling and pushing it, that made it travel. Also, not to forget, if we're talking about California and branching out in general, you also have to include the Northerners and what they were being able to do on their side and pushing the Chicano rap, for their side, with like Woody and Sir Dino and Speedy, and all of those individuals, Gold Toes, being, from their side making it happen, some of the first pioneers and engineers and individuals that inspired other individuals to want to do rap. Without them, you wouldn't have the inspiration of, all these individuals that now are here in these times, right? And with the collective of all these groups in different areas who at the time weren't working with each other, right? They were just members in their own area and they were just hustling out of their areas, right? And then, it would just travel. And it was a collective of all these individuals that helped build what's known as the Chicano brand, with individuals. Um, and their music, because like I said, these guys had to do it the hard way because they weren't getting any love from the mainstream media or radio play or anything like that. Very few made it onto radio, only like Kid Frost and Little Rob were only some of the few. Then Mr. Capone was able to have a few tracks on there as well, Power 106 and whatnot. And you even had Little Rob's videos on BET and MTV. So he elevated to pretty high status. But like I said, at the time it was very few were actually getting any love, so these individuals had to actually hustle on their own to be able to make it happen, traveling to these places and selling out of the trunk of their cars in these different states, and then it actually being able to even there's fans of the music that in England and France that I have actually wrote to me an email and said, oh yeah, I used to bump their music and when I live over here, so that's actually interesting to know, right? I was kind of like, oh damn, what the hell, that's crazy. In Japan and in the Philippines, there's a big Chicano support group over there, right? They like the Chicano style, right? You have like certain car clubs and groups of individuals that do the whole Chicano stilo, there's few channels that have covered it on here on YouTube, right? So it expanded outside of what's California, um, and it wouldn't have been able to be done without individuals like these people, right? Like what your Kid Frost, Lighter Shade of Brown, Mr. Capone, Go Toes, unfortunately SPM, and people like that, right? Then now you have higher names when it comes to rap, like when it comes to Mexicans, right? With your Mexican OTs and whatnot, right? And then even prior to that, you had individuals that were raza, that were rappers, right? You had your B Reals, your Psycho Realms, your Big Puns, but for some your Malo Man Ace, but for some strange reason, they don't fall under the Chicano rap title. Like I said, it just becomes weird with that, right? Like I myself don't understand it, right? A lot of people come with their reasonings for it that just make absolutely no fucking sense. I have talked about this prior videos, right? How people's breakdowns doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Every one of these individuals should fall under that category, right? Which is, if we're talking about raza, just raza, whether they're Salvadorian, Guatemalans, Puerto Ricans, whatever, raza in general, right? Spanish speaking individuals, right? Um, if we're talking about just them, they should all be under the same category because they're all rapping the same, well, similar. You get what I mean? So in general, but like I said, if we're talking about the innovators, the beginners, the ones that were able to make it happen, it wouldn't have been able to be done without your Kid Frost, your Lighter Shade of Browns, your Mr. Capone's, your Royalties, your Sir Dinos, your Gold Toes, you know, um, your Woodies and individuals like that. You know what I mean? that would probably be, like the main ones that we're talking about, like uh, in rappers in the first of their kind to open the doors for these individuals. Um, I know you also have your producers, your beat makers that were a big part, of making all of this happen as well, right? But these are some of the, names that were like, okay, the well-known names in the music industry, right? And then you had other groups that came along with their record labels, like I said, West Side Records, Pimp Rolling Records, your Hellifieds, your Old Town Records, your High Powers, and so many different other ones, right? So Eastside Coco and so many different groups, right? Like I said, this topic is split up in so many different groups and areas, right? Not like the brothers, right, where you had like different rappers from different areas, right, but they would all fall under like one umbrella, like whether it was like Death Row, you know what I mean? Because you had individuals that were from different areas of LA, right, Compton, South Central, Long Beach, but they were all under this umbrella, right? While Chicano rap, it worked a little bit different, right? You had your SD card, right? You had your rappers from San Diego, and then you had your rappers from, the IE and the SGV and the SFV, and then you have your upstate sureños, and then you have your norteños, and then you have your tejanos, and you get what I'm saying? Um, right? But it obviously did all start in, here in Southern California, with some of the first being, like Kid Frost, Lighter Shade of Brown, that were able to make it happen. And then you had the Brown Sides, and then the Little Robs and the Night Owls, and individuals like that. But overall, that's at least like a slight summary, short breakdown, right? Of some of the innovators, if we're to be talking about if just the first and the ones that kicked down the door, but not so much. Obviously, they're a big part of the Chicano rap, right? But when I was talking about the Mount Rushmore, I was talking about rappers, not innovators, not creators, not the first. We're talking about rappers. That's the Mount Rushmore of rappers, right? And to be on there, it takes skills in rapping. But overall, that was just my breakdown on the matter. What are your thoughts? Leave it in the comments and chat.